Welcome, everyone. Hey, welcome. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this discussion on Mission 300 and clean cooking, delivering energy access, gender justice, and health at scale. We are very happy to have this panel of experts today from civil society and the World Bank Group, as well as to be joined by all of you in the room who will be able to enrich the discussion more with the Q&A session at the end. I'm Catherine Vowles, a South African and the campaign officer for the Big Shift Global, a coalition of over 60 member organizations from around the world calling for development banks to stop funding fossil fuels and invest in secure, clean, renewable energy to ensure energy access and a livable planet for all. As a coalition, we've been engaging with the World Bank on Mission 300 from the very beginning. And for those of you who aren't so familiar with Mission 300, it is an initiative between the World Bank, the African Development Bank, with support from the Rockefeller Foundation, Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, and Sustainable Energy for All. Mission 300 has the ambitious goal of connecting 300 million people in Africa to energy by 2030. Of these 300 million people, the World Bank has committed individually to connecting 250 million people. Today, we will put a spotlight on clean cooking. As while Mission 300 powers ahead, clean cooking remains one of its most critical, yet under-prioritized pillars. So let's take a look at the figures so far. Can we have the slides? Oh, thank you. So, 43 million people. Since the launch of Mission 300 in July 2023, 43 million people have been connected to electricity by the World Bank Group, and an additional 5 million connections have been made by the African Development Bank. Since the 2024 Paris Summit on Clean Cooking in Africa, $2.2 billion have been mobilized for clean cooking by the World Bank Group, and the African Development Bank has pledged $2 billion over 10 years. In terms of commitments, 30 countries have joined this initiative so far, 30 national compacts have been launched, and 30 of these include clean cooking alongside electrification. But 1 billion Africans still lack access to clean cooking, and this number grows by 14 million every year. So the question we want to talk about in this session today is, how do we turn commitments into true transformation for these people? Here to tell us why this conversation on clean cooking matters is Karabo Mokgonyana. Also joining us from South Africa, Karabo is the Campaigns and Energy Advisor and overall Energy Co-Lead at PowerShift Africa, and she'll be presenting the findings of their clean cooking report. So over to you, Karabo.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It would take a long time to basically unpack all of the results and the outcomes. PowerShift Africa, together with our partners, we are launching a report called Clean Cooking in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this report is basically just breaking down clean cooking. So for us to have a basic discussion. So before we get into which energy forms should be the ones we choose, where should we get the financing, we're basically just created a report to break down what clean cooking is, the different tiers that exist within clean cooking, from tier 0 all the way to tier 5, and also breaking down the landscape of the 960 million, so close to 1 billion people on the continent lacking access to clean cooking, but also what clean cooking is, vis-a-vis what we've seen in terms of the heavy reliance on charcoal, firewood, and kerosene, but also the disproportional impacts of this. So we've seen that it mainly impacts women and children disproportionately, particularly because women and children tend to be the ones responsible for the cooking. We need women to be responsible for the cooking. And just in terms of, it also breaks down some of the health and social impacts, but also the economic and systemic risks that we see as a result of clean cooking. Things like household air pollution causing thousands of premature deaths annually, but also the respiratory and cardiovascular diseases that come as a result of people not having access to clean cooking, and the time poverty. So the amount of time that is actually spent limits cooking and collecting the firewood and so forth, limits the ability for women and young women, but also women's ability to engage in educational but also economic opportunities. And equally, in terms of the economic and systemic risks, the rising fuel costs and price volatility, especially bearing in mind the recent conflict impacts, but also the strain on household income and national import bills. African countries are net importers of a lot of the fuel that we utilize. So as a result, the cost of clean cooking and the cost of energy is quite high on the continent. And the risk of locking systems into centralized fuel supply chains. And we also break down where the share of sector total investment is sitting. And this shows there's the commercial one, which is primarily where it's sitting. But now with the commercial element, there's a big component of affordability. So subsidies, where do they come in? But also the commercial viability in terms of access, particularly for those who are in the remote communities, and then the consumer spending. So a lot of it is sitting with consumers. It's sitting with the people to basically finance this, and affordability is a big problem and a big question. So this is basically the breakdown. Let me not take too long presenting this. The report will be available. But let me close off by saying, we've been coming to the bank, and I've come to the bank a couple of times to engage on Mission 300, and we've had several conversations. For the first time, sitting on these Mission 300 panels, for me, this conversation is quite personal. It's not about, from a professional point of view where we engage at an energy level. It's a story. It's a lived story. It's a reality. It's something that I get to experience, my mothers get to experience, my grandmothers get to experience, my sisters get to experience. It's genuinely a lived reality, and it's something that I can proudly speak about in terms of experience, lived experience, but equally, I can also speak about it in the context of what I've seen in our communities, very close, very much proximate. It's really not a conversation that I'm engaging in at a very distant level. It's a very personal conversation. And I would even encourage the conversations that happen today to basically bear in mind that clean cooking is personal for the women, the children, and all the people that really don't have access to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karabo. And joining myself and Karabo on the panel today, we'll start from the far side. Dean?
Oh, sorry, Dean. He's not showing. It's still my picture showing.
Can we have the online panelist?
You don't hear me. I heard far side, so I thought maybe you're referring to the people in the room. But yeah, hi everyone. I'm Dean from Africa Change Lab. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, we're just doing introductions for now. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So, yeah, we have Dean joining online. He is the director of Africa Change Lab. To my left here, Rajneesh Bhuee from Kenya. Raj is the Just Transition co-lead at Recourse. And from the World Bank Group, we have two representatives here today. We have Johanna Christine Galan, who is a senior energy specialist at the World Bank and the coordinator of the World Bank's Mission 300 implementation unit, as well as Dr. Yabe Zhang, who is a senior energy specialist at the World Bank Group and a globally recognized leader in universal access to clean cooking. So how the panel will be structured today is that we'll begin with a first round of questions for the panelists, followed by a round of rapid response questions, and then move into the audience Q&A. And I would like to ask panelists to please keep answers to like 2 minutes, especially our World Bank reps. Now that we have the two of you, no, we didn't have enough time for everyone, but just so that we don't have to cut into the audience Q&A, because I think everyone would benefit from having questions from the room. So I will start with Johanna and Dr. Zhang. Can you walk us through how the World Bank defines clean cooking within Mission 300? What fuels and technologies are included in that definition, and how was that definition determined?
Yeah, let me get started on that front, and maybe just see the fact that two of us are here as an indication on how important the topic is, not as us trying to just monopolize time. So I'll start a little bit just contextualizing how clean cooking and Mission 300 fit together, and Yabe will speak a little bit more about the definition. So as you know, Mission 300 is about providing electricity access to 300 million people across sub-Saharan Africa. And though our main KPI is about electricity access, it's really been clear for us from the outset that we need to look at energy access holistically, and that, of course, includes clean cooking. So what we've done is in all of the energy compacts, clean cooking is an absolute part. It's a cornerstone of each of the compacts. I would go as far to say that. The governments really own the compacts. So the compacts are not developed by us. It's not a negotiated deal between us and the government. It's something that's the government-owned, cabinet-approved. And we really want to emphasize that, because it's really, really important to stress that, because it really signals that the governments are renewing their commitment to clean cooking. And that's proven by the fact that all of the governments included clean cooking, included clear targets and actions on clean cooking on that front. Where we come in is really on the financing side, and we are mainstreaming clean cooking increasingly into our energy access portfolio. So clean cooking is happening side by side with electricity access. We're doing that through major projects, but also regional programs. For instance, Ascent, which is our flagship for Eastern and Southern Africa. We're committing to electrify 100 million people to electricity access, and then another 20 million to clean cooking solutions. And that is rolled out across 20 countries. So that's just one example. And I'll hand to Yabe to let us know about the definition.
Yes, thank you, Johanna. As you can see that we, from the World Bank side, we are really doubled down our efforts to support clean cooking. So as Karabo mentioned at the beginning, that everyone has a connection with clean cooking. And for me, it's also have a personal connection. I've been working on clean cooking over past almost 20 years in various countries. And as also, when I was little, I also used traditional cooking, so I know that how it will look like. And from the World Bank side, we are taking a performance-based, technology-neutral approach. Why? It's because clean cooking is very contextual. It's, you know, that relate to the culture, the cuisine, what's available around your place. And we do not, from World Bank side, prescribe particular technology stove for users. And we try to build the environment incentives to encourage private sectors to deliver the contextualized solutions and continue to encourage innovation. But when we implement project, we do have performance-based criteria that aligned with ISO voluntary performance target, which also based on the WHO's air pollution guideline or air quality guideline. So from that clean definition, so WHO has a very clear definition. It's based on the emissions from the device combined with fuel, using the two key parameters. One is the particulate matter 2.5, the other is carbon monoxide. So only tier 4 and tier 5, that those two parameters reaching a certain threshold are considered clean. So if in practice, it often means clean fuel solutions like electric cooking, biogas, natural gas, LPG, ethanol. That is more from the end user perspective, that in terms of emission, health impact to the end users. But in addition to the more strict clean definition, there are also transitional solutions, which are often very applicable to African context. So in low-income households that also where the infrastructure is very constrained, using traditional biomass or processed biomass with improved technology or more advanced biomass stove can really help to reduce emissions and also reduce the fuel usage. So that's more considered as transitional solutions. And when it's done, so we often say tier 3, in some cases tier 2. And once tier 0 and tier 1 is more like 3 stone, open fire, that is most inefficient, polluting way of practicing. Unfortunately, now in African context, many households still experience that daily. So we see that country ownership is the key, financing is the key, and also continued technology innovation and business models are key. So World Bank side is really working on those fronts to help countries to advance clean cooking agenda.
Thank you very much for the definition. Now a question to Raj. There is a crucial question about what gets financed as clean cooking. And as was just highlighted, this can include from electric to biogas to LPG. So what principles should guide these choices to ensure climate health and affordability goals all align?
Thanks, everyone, and good afternoon, and I think, is it good morning or good evening to the ones joining in online? Just like the rest of the panelists, very happy to see a full room here, and definitely, that's a sign of how important the topic is. My name is Bhuee from Recourse. I'm the Just Transition Lead, and Recourse is a Dutch-based organization, and we track the finance investments of multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, into their climate and energy portfolios. And I'll just pick up from where Joe was talking about numbers, but also finance behind this. And thanks to Dr. Zabier in terms of just defining the fact that LPG is a bit cleaner than probably other traditional methods. I think the definition itself matters of clean cooking. Right now, the World Bank and IEA are including LPG, biogas, ethanol, and many other sort of solutions or energy technologies as clean cooking. And the International Energy Agency projects that 45% of clean cooking access will come from LPG, yes. But then the question we always keep asking is, LPG and LNG will lock countries in fossils for decades. We're calling it a transition solution, but is there a timeline for when this will stop? You want to invest into something that can actually be able to provide that access right now. Mission 300 is up to 2030. Within the next 3 years, are we actually able to provide that finance right now for them to get, for people to get access to that solution? That's the first one. As much as LPG is cleaner than charcoal, it's not zero emissions. It does create import dependencies, and it's subject to price volatility that hits poor households hardest. Karabo has actually shown us what she does in her personal life. That's the lived reality of almost 900 million women on the continent. And we are talking about this on a day-to-day basis. I think the principles definitely are, civil society-led, and this is based on lived realities of people. The first thing is it should be health first. Solutions, I think Dr. Zabi has mentioned, the definition is from the WHO air guidelines, but it should not just be a blanket statement of it's better than firewood, it's better than charcoal. Does the air quality index actually improve, the lives of these women? LPG itself does still cause, respiratory issues in the long term. So does that meet the air quality guidelines? What are the long-term effects of that? That'd be the first one. The second one, the World Bank is, talks about being Paris aligned or, ensuring this Paris alignment. And if we're serious about talking about 1.5 degrees, then we should be building out on fossil fuel cooking infrastructure, even if it means over time, a sort of phased out approach. That should be a second guideline. The third one would be economic sustainability. And we are talking about renewable solutions, and I appreciate the panelists talking about that. We are talking about electric cooking, we're talking about traditional things like biogas, biomass, which creates local value chains. And the World Bank is talking about its North Star being jobs. Some of these traditional methods do create jobs for these women, where unpaid care is what probably they can't afford on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, I think gender and affordability. Yes, we're talking about access, but can they afford it? We can talk about a solution today, but is it something that they can actually afford for themselves? We can propose that solution. Can Karabo's grandmother and so many other grandmothers on the continent actually be able to transition away from charcoal to that solution you're proposing? So women need solutions that they can afford every day, they can own, but not something that's forced onto them. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj. And building on from what Raj has told us all about LPG, Karabo, from a climate and energy just perspective, what are your concerns about this? And on the other hand, what would genuinely renewable clean cooking pathways look like at scale?
Okay, thank you so much. I guess maybe let me start off by speaking about something I said at the last meetings, to say I think context really matters, particularly when dealing with the African continent. I had made a joke last year to say in Africa we have 3 hot meals a day. We don't really have cold breakfast, cold lunch. We like our meals hot. And that means that women are spending a lot of time cooking. Women are spending a lot of time, basically interacting with whatever source of energy that we're using for clean cooking. And the reason why I had mentioned that is because of the LPG component, it being a cleaner option, but it's also about exposure. How much, we spend a lot of time making those amazing African meals, but at the same time, it means that we're highly exposed. And if we are sitting and being exposed to LPG for lengths of time, it means that the harm, while long-term in nature, is going to be impactful. So can we not just choose methods that are really impactful, bearing in mind the context and bearing in mind that a lot of these women and these people are basically mainly in remote communities. So I just want to mention that. I think a lot of it has to do with the health bits, but also LPG not being clean. I think I'd be repeating what Raj had said in terms of the actual impact. So the health component, the economics of LPG just don't really make sense. And maybe let me piggyback and add the fact that with the current geopolitical context, we realize that the African continent is very vulnerable when it comes to the energy system. The impacts of the global energy market really impacted our countries. And that speaks to the vulnerability, but also how much of a high net importer we are of energy. Yes, we'll be importing gas, oil, and all the others. But in the context of renewable-based solutions, we're not going to be importing anything besides the technology itself. So we also need to choose solutions on the basis of the reality of the vulnerability we face on the continent, being a net importer, in that one shift within the Middle East in terms of the energy system is impacting us. Governments have had to spend thousands and thousands on subsidizing the energy systems right now. We are struggling. And even though, well, every day there's a new shift in terms of what's happening, even though there might be shifts and the global markets are seeming to change, we're still facing the impacts. The cost of it all is really high. So there's also a cost element. Gas is not as cost-friendly as we think it is. It's really not sitting on the least cost methods that, the bank has been pushing for. It's just really not. So we really need to choose systems that are very much well aligned with the Africa context. The fact that we cook 3 times a day, the fact that the current geopolitics don't allow for us to continue with the gas components, considering the fact that we are extremely vulnerable to it, and that we have a benefit. We have tons and tons of renewable potential on the continent. Why are we not leapfrogging, and why are we not just utilizing that and getting the relevant technology that we need? Yeah, I think I'll pause there. I hope I answered your questions.
You definitely did. Thank you. The next question is for Dean. Dean, are you with us? Great.
Yes, I am.
Cool. So when it comes to scaling clean cooking methods that are actually suitable for the African continent, what financing innovations are showing promise? What's working beyond traditional models?
All right, thanks for the question, hard question, but happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. Macroeconomic distortion. When nearly like 1 billion people cook with inefficient fuels, what we're really seeing in Africa is a massive tax on women, a health cost shifted onto public systems, a hidden subsidy to deforestation, and a drag on productivity and human capital. So if we're looking at Mission 300 and grounding it being about energy access, then clean cooking is not adjacent. It is central, because this is not about stoves. It's about fixing a market failure at a continental scale. So now to answer your question very shortly in terms of financing innovations, in terms of, I think what has worked, we need to first really look at it from a point where we are arguing that we've been trying to finance clean cooking like infrastructure, but we have to change our ideology and actually realize that it actually behaves economically like a distributed consumer transition problem. Now, the shift needed is how do we think around financing innovations where we are not financing supply, we're financing adoption. So now what's working currently is how we have somewhat treated clean cooking like mobile phones and not power plants, because the breakthroughs in telecom were not really just cheap towers, right? It was prepaid, pay-as-you-go model, something that we've picked up with the various case studies that we've done in Africa. So that's currently working. And looking at the clean cooking scales that have been really grounded on households where they can pay in small and predictable increments. So essentially, clean cooking scales when we finance cash flow and not capital cost. The other aspect is if we use public money to buy down risk and not build assets. So the real constraint is not technology, it's perceived risk plus affordability. So public finance should essentially look at de-risking last mile distributors. They need to guarantee demand, and we need to reward sustained usage and not just connections, right? We need more projects. We need markets that actually work for this system to actually be right. Now, we also need to look at it from shifting from debt-heavy finance to, I guess, like for a better word, blended affordability finance, right? So households cannot absorb the high cost of capital. We need to acknowledge that. So the model essentially then becomes small targeted subsidies for the entry point, phase one, conventional capital if we're looking at it from a scalability point of view. And then if we're looking at distribution, looking at it from a private capital perspective. So you are correcting a classic externality and actually partnering it or really just grouping it with what we call liquidity constraint, right? And if you look at it from this instance, we also begin to realize that, the price and the core benefits around the pricing, we need to understand that if done correctly, clean cooking would essentially be a pillar that actually delivers on health savings, on climate benefits, and even productivity gains, right? Essentially, and I think that's very important. And I guess the last thing that maybe I want to say is when benefits particularly are corrected, right, and they're essentially public, but if the costs are actually private and shifting away from it being a public demand, the adoption of that nature will always stall economically, and that's where the real problem is. And essentially, we end up creating a textbook case for what we call results-based payments or public core financing. And at the end of the day, if we don't introduce this aspect of even involving the private sector, we're going to stall the idea of how we can actually look at the resilience that can be operationalized through actually unlocking clean cooking correctly with the right financing innovations. I think there was one question, right? Thanks.
Yes, thank you. That was a really tough question, but that was an incredible answer. And I'm going to turn back to our World Bank reps now, Joe and Dr. Yabe, to talk about unlocking clean cooking in Africa. And looking across the 30 compacts, that we currently have, at what currently is working well for integrating clean cooking, what models or country approaches are showing early promise?
Okay. All right. So, as I mentioned, all of the compacts are including clean cooking, which in itself is already, I think, very, very amazing. But it's not only that they're included, it's also, I think, that the scale and ambition, which is great. Across the 30 compacts have been launched, the governments have committed to connect more than 500 million people to clean cooking solutions. And that's just 30. We have more compacts actually coming. We have 10 more compacts that will be launched end of June. So that number will increase too as we're adding more compacts. And then if you're looking what's actually the commitment from the governments in those compacts, more than half of them have committed to adopt a clean cooking strategy. And they're not only committed to adopting that, they made it one of their top priority reforms. So we've asked the governments, what are your top 10 reforms in the compacts? And 16 of them said clean cooking definitely in the top 10. So we're not only having clean cooking in the compacts, it's also really prioritized within the compact implementation. We also see a good, strong focus on affordability, and I agree, right? Affordability is a key constraint. So 10 compact governments have decided to introduce fiscal measures to reduce the cost of clean cooking through reduction of VAT or reduction of import duties, which can really go quite a long way in addressing consumer affordability. And another 10 governments have also committed to introduce results-based financing or similar schemes that will enable the private sector to deliver clean cooking solutions, but not just deliver them to any household, but really with a pro-poor focus, ensuring that that results-based financing is used to address the viability and affordability gap. So then when we think what's working in terms of models, what are the initial results we are seeing? So strong country ownership, to no surprise, is really the predictor of success. What we're seeing in Madagascar is that they have very early on adopted a national clean cooking policy and strategy. And that is followed by investments. So we're seeing that there is the clean cooking project, smart clean cooking project funded by OFID, $35 million. Coming already in, and then we have a new Ascent project also coming in Madagascar, which will also support clean cooking at quite substantial scale. I already mentioned results-based financing. I want to give you an example on how that's actually taking shape in DRC, where as part of the Mewinda Fund, already 5 private operators have been selected to provide clean cooking solutions to 150,000 households. And again, this is not only enabling the private sector to do that, but to ensure we are actually reaching households that would otherwise not have been served or reached. So really pushing the envelope and going deeper. So we're still early in the compact implementation, but I think these early successes are quite promising, and we hope that we see more of that going forward from all of the governments that have made commitments on clean cooking. I'll pass over to Tiawe a little bit to speak about.
Yeah, maybe I can talk a bit more about some overall approach that World Bank is taking when we design and implement World Bank projects together with governments. So there are 3 key pillars we are doing. One is on the policy and reforms through energy compacts and also ongoing energy dialogue. As Joe mentioned, there's a set of energy compacts, reforms, including the national planning, etc. I want to respond to an earlier question regarding, LPG or not LPG, genuine clean cooking, or are we doing a transitional approach? Okay, as I mentioned, it's very contextualized approach, right? There's cost of inaction. If you're waiting for the perfect solution, maybe another 10, 20, 30 years, people still suffering, right? And a couple of years ago, World Bank and then the WHO were developed a roadmap, a long-term roadmap toward net zero clean cooking. And we say, 2030, primary goal is universal access. Let everyone to access clean cooking. So let's try not to make anyone leave behind, and whatever solutions, support. And then that starting from 2030 to 2040, really focus on decarbonize the clean cooking solutions. And by 2050, we aim for universal access to zero-emission cooking solutions, clean cooking solutions. So let's not be the perfect as enemy of good, right? So, and also, again, every country, you have different current status, the government affordability to help the poor households, and your energy endowment. So also highlight that a few years ago, World Bank, SMAP also developed what we call clean cooking planning tool. So each country, you have baseline data, you can play around in terms of, okay, I want to electric cooking percentage, LPG percentage, improve biomass, or biogas, or ethanol, and you will see the investment cost required and what are the benefits can generate. You also see, okay, if you do nothing, what's the cost of inaction in terms of health cost, gender cost, and then the environment, like deforestation, also come with costs. So having those two knowledge is important, it's powerful to help you to understand better in terms of trajectory, develop better trajectory. So the three key pillars I mentioned, one is policy reforms, planning. Second, it's dedicated financing. Third is knowledge and innovation. So the three pillars need to coordinate and reinforce each other. So this is where how the World Bank working with the counterpart of the government to understand the current status. We have specific tools we call multi-tier framework, MTF survey tool. We understand what's the current status. And you have vision in terms of where you want to go by 2030, 2040, 2050. Right? And then you develop pathway and you see where the financing is best utilized to catalyze the private financing. I really want to also echo what Dean had mentioned earlier, because the lessons learned very much aligned with what we have learned, right? The different financing instruments, the debt financing, the RBF, the guarantee, the de-risking, how to better use carbon finance. They can work together and to better utilize public financing, which is always limited, and then find the pain point of the private sector and help them to crowding them and make them to be more successful in delivering solutions on the ground.
Thank you very much. And it's really great to hear how clean cooking is being prioritized in the 30 national compacts by governments and by the World Bank Group. And I believe that we've been joined here today for this conversation by the Honourable Minister of Energy and Mining of Malawi, Honourable Dr. Matanga, along with her team, who are also here today for this important discussion, which is just demonstrating how important and timely this topic actually is. So my next question is for Karabo, and it's sort of two parts, sorry, but I can remind you of the second part because it is a bit long. But hearing about this prioritization from all angles of clean cooking, we want to hear from a community experience across Africa and from your own lived experience. What does successful clean cooking implementation actually look like on the ground? And the second part is particularly for women who bear the greatest burden of harmful cooking fuels but are often left out of decision making. How can compacts ensure women's voices genuinely shape clean cooking strategies? And how do different fuel choices impact women and girls differently? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to need you to repeat the second one. In terms of, there's a few examples that exist on the continent, but I'll speak to one from South Africa in Limpopo, whereby the approach was more so from an economic point of view. So the creation of community cooperatives and the utilization of women-owned and women-led SMMEs as the key proponents of driving these specific systems. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I think ultimately in any sort of any sort of work that is being done within Mission 300, this is me encouraging for women SMMEs to be prioritized as any sort of bidding is happening, because they tend to be on the margins, and often excluded in terms of selection, because either they don't have the capacity to provide this at the scale that the banks often want. And we think that from the perspective of being effective, women-owned and women-led SMMEs and any sort of community cooperatives should be considered as implementers. And the reason why I'm mentioning this specific example is because so these were solar stoves. It was basically a pilot to test out what solar stoves actually, whether they would work, one, in the context of the intensity of cooking that happens within these communities, but also in the context of how do you create an entire system. So it's not just about bringing these solar stoves and then imparting some kind of capacity to say this is how you use it. But you need to create an entire ecosystem around maintenance, around the tech access, around affordability, but also they created a market out of it. So there was elements of these women SMMEs, not only from women within the community, but they also then created a distribution chain around how it is that they can supply it holistically, how they can, maintenance of these technologies. So then the idea is, if you're going to then, address clean cooking, it should be a system approach. It shouldn't be let's just get everybody to have the stoves and then that's it, because then we then face the same issues around, when the solar stove is damaged, then what? How do we ensure that this is not just a cooking agenda, it's also a development and an economic agenda where we're creating income for these very women within these communities. So those kinds of things were very much important. The inclusion of these women from a decision-making perspective, but also from an economic point of view, because we tend to say, yes, bring women on the table in the decision-making rooms and stuff, but at the end of the day, the economic dynamics often then dictate how the system itself actually moves. And it's important then to include them, yes, in the decision making, in terms of, whether it's governance systems, Mission 300, compact implementation, how do we ensure that women are involved in the decision making, but how we're also deliberate about choosing women developers, women SMMEs as the ones that are basically implementing some of these. I think another thing around a success element that we saw within this program is male allyship. This is not a woman issue. It's really not. Yes, the woman here, shout out to Dean for showing up. Clean cooking is everybody's. You all eat, I'd like to think. So we all eat. Oh, sometimes. Yes, in the times that you eat, then this specific topic, yes, it disproportionately affects women and young women, but it is a topic that affects each and every one of us. And it's important that male allyship also sits at the center of how are the different spaces that men sit in and make decisions, whether it's ministries of finances, whether it is the private sectors, whether it's any sort of financial decision making that is made. How do we make this basically, how do you make decisions that consciously really take into consideration the gender disproportional impacts of this? So this is me calling on the males and the people that eat sometimes to please push this forward.
Thank you very much. My next question goes to Raj. So talking about inclusion in this conversation, how does accountability look in this context? How can civil society effectively monitor whether compact commitments on clean cooking translate into real household level change for people?
Thanks a lot. And I think you started with the numbers. So what's very impressive is we have 30 compacts, and I think, Joe, you mentioned, 10 countries have said, there's going to be policy reforms. Dr. Jab has mentioned the same. So there's commitment from the countries. And I think that's where we need to start with. But there's a massive gap between what's in the compacts and what actually, reaches households. So the true access is what we need to monitor. The true access is what we need the stories behind. So it's not just the 43 million, that have access right now. Can we actually be able to go and corroborate those stories? Can we have, a Hannah or, somebody who can actually be able to say, And probably this is to the World Bank Group. Maybe the next time, those kind of stories would be really good to hear. Somebody who says, I've had, this kind of access in the last couple of months because of Mission 300. That's the first one. I think in terms of what civil society can do, I think it's already a brilliant solution that we're able to sit on the same panel and talk about things. So I think the multi-stakeholder engagement is very important. That's the first one. And I think, secondly, we need to push for disaggregated data. Thanks a lot, Karabo, for saying this is not just about women. And it's lovely to have one man on the panel. So it's not, looking like it's just gender is only a women issue. That's the first one. But when we talk about disaggregated data, we should look at, how much is going for example, LPG infrastructure versus how much is going for renewables, and look at the cost-benefit analysis of that. That's a first. I think, secondly, we can also talk about how much is going for biogas, how much is going for example, the electric stoves, and go to the nitty-gritties on the ground and actually be able to see, yes, at that level, we are able to access it. But one more thing to that is then add the health outcomes of that. If we have the data, and the World Bank is doing an amazing job on actually being able to track this, we have the and maybe Joe can talk about it, but we do have the tracker, the Mission 300 tracker. We are able to go and do, live tracking of that as civil society and any other actors. Are we able to go a bit deeper into that, some more meta-analysis on it? And that would bring me to community-level monitoring. So it's not just our role as civil society. How can Karabo's grandmother be able to say, she actually got that access? I keep saying the solutions have to be with the people. The access has to be for the 300 million people we are talking about. It's their story. It's about them, having on a day-to-day basis. And probably, lastly, I'd say we have the compact delivery and monitoring units, and we know those are national government, they are attached to the governments. Maybe to the governments that are in the room and, Honorable from Malawi, this is a chance. Civil society should have access to these CDMUs. I think some of us, I come from Kenya. I personally don't know which office I can access, the CDMU at, and we know Kenya is making progress on that. So that, would be a shout out to governments to actually allow us to have that, interaction with you and actually be able to do storytelling on the ground. And lastly, I would say annual progress reports should include clean cooking alongside electricity. We do household surveys. We should have clean cooking data. It's not just the World Bank to provide, or the African Development Banks to provide. I know financing will be an issue for that. But for those of us who are actually doing projects on the ground, are we actually able to track this data and say, in real time, it's actually happening like that? And I'll come back to, to you, Kath, is if we're talking about knowledge and innovation, which is one of the pillars, you've talked about, Rabia, then knowledge extension. Do people have access to this? Apart from just the Mission 300 tracker or, the database that's there, I know SMAP has actually, through the World Bank's SMAP program, there is financing towards clean cooking. Are we able to actually see what projects have been financed? Apart from just the tracker itself, is there access to these projects? Are we able to know how much of this money has already been given to the countries and then go back to the CDMUs and say, you've gotten this money, how far have you gotten with it? So it's almost like a sort of independent evaluation. The World Bank is saying this, or the AFDB is saying this. Can we actually ground truth at ourselves? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Raj. We are running low on time, as in every panel. But and Dean, I haven't forgotten you. I'm going to come back to you, but I do want to pass back to Johanna and Dr. Yabe, because Raj was talking about this gap that exists between the National Compact commitments and what reaches households, as well as how people are able to participate in this process and gain access to what's actually happening in their countries that's affecting them. So how do we bridge this gap?
Yeah, so for World Bank projects, that's on the Mission 300, right? Every project, we have access to information policy. Basically, all our project design, procurement plan, the progress report available online. But more importantly is that it's really on the progress on the ground, so that we also have the monitoring evaluation, have the grievance redress mechanisms, and particular for clean cooking, right? It's really require collective efforts. We will have intermediary government often our current project design including results-based financing that Dean also mentioned, because it's switching from input to output to results-based, because results you can measure at different levels, delivering the cooking device, continue the use, and up to the carbon emission reduction verified. So the chain of results, and then the RBF can be used to design in such flexible way to tackle the pain point in the market, and then monitor results accordingly and report the results. So I want to highlight that a couple of examples to show that how it works in practice. For example, in Rwanda, that we have implemented the pro-poor RBF, basically subsidies linked to the level of socioeconomic categories, Ubidehi in that case. So the poorer the household get higher subsidies, up to 90%. The top tier, no subsidies, sorry. So that's really to implement toward the poor. And then the RBF also portion the payment based on the purchase, then also adoption in a year. So because once you get used to that, you will continue to use and have that adoption measurement also increase the people's behavior. And then that we also bring in the carbon finance. So the government will receive carbon revenue based on the RBF. It's also based on data collected. So it's a very data-intensive program and leverage that data collected. Once the carbon revenue comes in, it will reflow back to the RBF fund, make the RBF revolving. So this is one approach. And then that in Uganda, we also have some similar approach, but also added with supply side subsidies. Because in Uganda, there are some more remote island areas. It's very expensive for supply side to reach there. So provide additional incentive for suppliers when they set up the infrastructure, distribution channel, after sale, support, then you get additional incentives. So that's the way that it's really helped the market development and then support the more rural and the more vulnerable population. So again, that I would say that towards the actual implementation, the flexible design and regular market sounding, because you have data, right, and you have consultation with the market, and also involving the civil society, because they play important role in terms of various reasoning, in terms of monitoring whether the program has been implemented according to the design. If there are any integrity issues, it's also important support for the World Bank and the government to make adjustment when needed. I think that, again, collectively, so everyone have connection with cooking, and also everyone can play a role of making any cooking program successful.
Johanna, do you have anything you want to add?
I just love it when our progress portal gets plugged by our CSO colleagues. So just maybe to give an update on that, we just launched 20 minutes ago the version 2.0 of that. So there's an update to it. So you asked for more information on the connection status of the project. So behind each project, there's now the link to the actual project site. So you will see all the project documentation, see exactly where it stands on disbursement and all of the interesting stats. And we also have now included more indicators, and now you can see how many businesses we electrified and how many schools and health centers we electrified, which is 130,000 businesses and 20,000 schools and health facilities. So that's where we stand. And maybe just one thing to add on the roles of CSOs, I think also help us keep the governments accountable, right? We have commitments in the compacts. We really want to see that these are, becoming a reality. We will be launching the public compact reporting reports in June during the Africa Energy Forum. So you will all get a sense on where the governments actually stand in the implementation. And I think that's a great tool to engage the governments in a dialogue and see where we're making progress, where are we lagging, what more needs to be happening. And then the other thing, coming back to the question on getting women more integrated, I think it's a really important one, and you might know that all of our projects are what we're calling gender tagged. So it means really we need to we are always addressing in our design, how can we first identify and then help close that gender gap in the projects. So if you're seeing something in our project where you feel, okay, this is really something that a World Bank could take on, or where you're feeling it's not yet done enough, let us know. I mean, the teams are always happy to hear thoughts and ideas on how that gender tagging could look like in reality to make the biggest impact.
Just want to add this gender because it's a very important point. I mean, women as users, right? It's a direct beneficiary. We track that, okay? Women and then female-headed users. But also on the supplier side, that we do have indicators in many, I mean, at least the projects we are involved, we do have, okay, additional incentives for women-led business. And then also we track the female employee. Because, I mean, having an indicator, having a tracking, it's very powerful. So even initially may have a lower bar, but having there, you see that, okay, people start to raise awareness and try to say, okay, I want to at least to meet that target. And in Rwanda, particularly, we do see that, okay, in some cases, okay, we have contingent approval, and the company have to make efforts to ensure they meet the quota of female employee. And then that over time, we do see, okay, we have hundreds of job generated and more, around 50% are female employed. So.
Thank you very much, and very exciting to hear about Scorecard 2.0. Raj has one addition, and then we'll move to Dean for the final question before moving on to the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Johanna, and it's really exciting for some of us who love data analysis. It's nice to know that there's something new, and we can keep looking at it. I was just going to add on to the successes, like Dr. Jabi has mentioned. GAP, I know that's one of your partners, if I've pronounced it right. They're electric cooking in Kenya and Uganda. They are delivering results. And I think the RBF, so Recourse did do a report ahead of last year's annuals around the COSEP 3 and the RBF model working for a couple of counties in Kenya. So as a Kenyan, it's proud to say there is a model that can work. I'm not going to say it's a question, but I think the pay-as-you-go models they're brilliant. The only thing is, like Karabo has mentioned, we would want them to be a bit longer term rather than, today we're doing bioethanol and then the next day we're thinking of a different solution because, again, as a Kenyan, cocoa networks, miserably failed. And I have a lot of friends whose mothers, were using that. And it was a clean cooking solution that was working. And it was an RBF, based model. So something like that. That's one of the risks, obviously, in any projects. But the long-term sustainability of some of these things needs to be considered in the projects. And just to say, I think Mission 300 is more about transformation rather than just incremental, sort of performance or improvement. So that should be part of, project design as well. Not just, I know we're talking about leaving no one behind, and that principle does stand, but we're talking about investments from different types of financing models, and some of them are, debt related, and our countries are having crazy debt burdens right now. So it's just a constant push from civil society to keep saying, when we are thinking of solutions, let them actually be those that can work, for the longer term. Yeah, thank you. Back to you, Kath.
Thank you, Raj. Final question is to Dean. Both Johanna and Dr. Yabe spoke about whole market development in relation to clean cooking, and something Raj just mentioned was about Mission 300 being about transformation. So how do we build local supply chains and create jobs through clean cooking transitions for a larger scale economic transformation rather than just importing solutions?
Thanks again for that question. I'm sad to say that I can't believe I said question one was the hardest. But let's give it a shot. I think what we need to look at is around building local supply chains is if we import, clean cooking solutions, we solve the symptom. But if we, build local value chains, we solve the economy. So how do we shift from product distribution to ecosystem development, right? And we need to start with the missing middle, which is distribution and services. Jobs are not just in manufacturing, they're also in retail networks, maintenance, fuel logistics, last mile delivery. This is where the largest employment multiplier sits. So essentially, the clean cooking economy is a services economy before it's a manufacturing one, right? And also looking at building fuel markets and not just stove markets, right? Adoption fails when fuel is unreliable or expensive. So countries should essentially focus on domestic fuels where viable, right? Particularly, biofuels and electricity. They need to focus on stable supply chains and also focus on predictable pricing, right? So this actually reduces import dependency and also helps us, with the currency pressure and the volatility of the foreign exchange. We also need to use clean cooking as, how would I put this, as an industrial policy entry point, right? How do we look at it from local assembly that creates a ripple effect that feeds into manufacturing, that feeds into innovation? Now, when we've achieved that, how do we link that into agriculture, small urban SMEs, and also women-led enterprises? Because essentially, clean cooking is actually one of the fastest ways to turn energy access into jobs. But more importantly, we need to remind ourselves that we need to also anchor this locally, right? So how do we think about African agency and anchor ownership locally? So if value chains are externally owned, the profits actually essentially leak out. And if locally anchored, we would instead get reinvestment, and as I said and explained, job creation. And more importantly as well, capacity building, because that also then creates, a certain skill set of people capable of managing and looking towards that market in order for it to be operationalized in a way that creates developmental pathways across Africa and also tackles, in tandem, the clean cooking crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. You once again answered that amazingly. Sorry for the two very difficult questions. But I think you've given us all a lot to think about while we open the floor to the Q&A session. We have a microphone at the back, so if you have a question you'd like to ask, please queue up at the microphone. I think we'll take 3 questions at a time. You can direct them to a specific panelist, or it can just be open. And if you could introduce yourself, your name and organization, just very briefly, and keep your questions to a minute or under. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Luisa Galveo from WaterAid, and we know tomorrow there's going to be a Water Forward is going to be launched, and we are, of course, very inspired by what Mission 300 did for energy and hoping to harvest some lessons learned from this incredible panel. So I wanted to ask if Mission 300 has, and if so, what indicators do you have to track the hardest to reach? Because we know that anytime you have a quantitative target for these missions, you create an incentive for solutions that can scale, especially given the very tight timeline we have to 2030. And so how do you ensure that those solutions that are harder, frankly, and to reach those hardest to reach are prioritized and truly transformational, which is the ambition of everyone in the room? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next question. We're going to take 3 at a time.
Oh gosh, I just pulled that off. Hi, I'm Bridget Mitchell from T. Rowe Price, and I was wondering what has the experience been so far from the Clean Cooking Outcome Bond and its ability to monetize the sale of carbon credits that are the variable component of the bond coupon?
Yeah, hi there. My name is Patrick. I'm from the African Green Transition Fund, a new fund launching for renewable energy. So I have a bit of a different question. You talked a lot about results-based financing. So I'm wondering, have you applied, or are there programs where you apply it actually to the non-private sector actors, i.e. the countries that have to implement them and the World Bank officials, the people that work to make it happen, right, in terms of bonus schemes, or maybe a country that is going really well gets additional financing components, or the people that actually do it get a bonus, get a holiday, whatever it is, right? So using the private sector experiences.
Wow, thank you for those really efficient question answering. Shall we start with Johanna and Dr. Yabe?
Yeah, I can maybe speak to the first and the last question, and I'm not sure how familiar with the outcomes one. So in terms of focusing on the hardest to reach, I think the first thing I want to do is give a shout out to I think Don's still here. We have Don from IFC here, and we actually, through IFC, invested into the Acumen Hardest to Reach Fund, which basically really speaks to that, making sure that we are really focusing on not only the low-hanging fruit, but really the hardest to reach. And quite frankly, the mission that we've put forward, 300 million people, you can't just focus on the low-hanging fruit. You have to go to the hardest to reach. You have to go through the rural areas. And on the electricity side, we said 50% of the connections will come through distributed renewable solutions, because we know we need to go into rural areas, and we know grid extension is just not a viable way to do that. And results-based financing that we're doing, it's always has that pro-poor element to it. It's not only about moving the private sector deeper into areas that are difficult to reach, but also then seeing what do we need to do on the demand side to really make sure products actually become affordable. And then rewarding our teams and project implementation units and governments on moving faster. Absolutely. So we have, I think what we all love about new programmatic approaches, and you might have heard some of our seniors speak about new multi-phase programmatic approach, MPAs, which Ascent is one of them. And it makes it much easier for us to put additional financing to those projects that are running really fast, that are implementing at scale, and making sure that these projects are actually not running out of money, but that we are putting more money into them and are a little more flexible on how the money is being allocated. And that's really the entire idea behind Framework's programmatic approaches that we're pursuing. And I think also, just maybe on a personal note, I mean, having a big objective, flagship objective like Mission 300, then of course, your own performance reviews have a bit of a different nature, because then of course management is asking you, what have you contributed to reaching that target as well? So that's definitely something we are already seeing and feeling.
Maybe I can add a bit on the in terms of hardest to reach, because it's always require more incentives for people to go extra miles to reach the poorer households. So recently, a couple of weeks ago, right, the World Bank and the GCF, World Bank proposal to the GCF called Ascend Green, it's precisely try to focus on the vulnerable population, that climate vulnerable population in particular, and using the distributed renewable energy and clean cooking solution, and also products we use. And GCF, a Green Climate Fund, they are providing more concessional financing, and it was approved end of March by the GCF board, 250 million GCF financing of World Bank Ascent program. So we're still working on the legal agreement, but that's very excited that we're going to launch later this year, and it will cover 21 countries in the Africa East and South. And we have done the consultations in all countries, and I think it's very exciting, and including 5 financing facilities that complement each other. The debt financing, the results-based financing, majority funding is results-based financing that provide additional incentives to reach the harder to reach vulnerable population. And then also the equity financing, working with IFC on the Zafiri, that also enable the companies have equity funding and then to deliver clean cooking, DRE solutions, and also de-risking. We're also designing results, the risk-sharing facility to support to bring in local financial institutions to be more fully familiar with clean cooking companies, DRE companies, and to online to them. And last but not least, it's also carbon risk mitigation facility that help to provide the floor price of carbon to stabilize carbon revenue. Again, important revenue, potential revenue for clean cooking sector. So which is linked to a third question regarding the clean cooking outcome bond. There was this new instrument that is structured by our Treasury department that to provide this financing to help a company, I think called Up Energy in Ghana. It was approved last December, and it's still working in progress. So we're hoping the idea is that, okay, if you are able to achieve results, and then that there's be coupon linked to that carbon revenue results, that is support the company to get upfront financing. So again, it's a space require a lot of continued innovation. So from the bank side, we also continue to try using different instruments, different things, and continue to learn, and also like to work together with other different partners and the civil society organizations to tackle this issue.
Thank you. I think both those questions, all three of those questions were to World Bank, so we'll get the next three.
Hi, my name is Shirley Idokpa. I'm from Shirley Ehai Foundation. I wanted to say I'm so grateful for the work that Mission 300 is doing, and I wanted to ask this question. How will Mission 300 financing institutionalize gender justice as a binding economic policy benchmark to deliver measurable improvements in women's incomes, employment opportunities, and economic security? And what physical and structural reforms will ensure these outcomes are enforced and tracked at the country level? Should I repeat myself?
I think we got that.
You got it? Okay, thank you.
Next question, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Liza Makombore. I am with the Institute for Agroecology and the Stop Financing Factory Farming Coalition. Excited because I see my colleagues from South Africa. I'm originally from South Africa, but I'm now based here in Vermont, USA. I wanted to ask a question. I think it was the gentleman who was giving an example, or it's Karabo, who spoke about sort of doing a parallel with the mobile sector. So my question is, the mobile sector has really done well in Africa, even infrastructure-wise. It's been overly financed, in my opinion, and adoption widely. Right now, I can talk to my grandma in Africa on a video call with no barriers at all. So my question is, when it comes to the energy sector, I feel like you spoke about the 3 pillars, which is the policy and planning, direct investments, and research and knowledge systems. What do you think are some of the barriers within the energy sector that is preventing Africa to move forward when it comes to energy? Because research shows that Africa is still the darkest continent. I think it's Jeffrey Sachs who took a picture, an aerial view of Africa at night, and most parts are dark. So I feel there is no visibility to some of these constraints and these barriers. And in line with that, can you explain results-based financing in the context of systemic financing models that you are trying to apply or take from the mobile sector and learn from? Thank you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My own question will center around application of AI. Is that being taken advantage of to solve the perennial problem that we are talking about? As I was testing one of my concepts sitting out there, I was absorbing in everything that was being talked about, and there are solutions to some of it right away. In case if you're wondering about my accent, I pick it up in Greensboro, North Carolina, which again, originally from Nigeria, never lose the accent. I like it that way after 40 years in the country. I'm also a professor at CAU, Clark Atlanta University, but also we are in the heart of Tido Tech International, when I went through the spring of last year, I went ahead, pluck out 200 of my retirement fund to actually actualize some of the things we are talking about here today. But 30 acreage, put a wall around it, now developing what I call AI and Cybersecurity Climate Innovation Center Hub. Now, from all indication, if you use the AI, even some of the questions that are being raised, it gives me a total help even for the development of a smart cooker that I name it. When I was hearing you first, you say clean. Yeah, the way the accent comes to me was you say king. And then the way our own accent clarified that to me, why not a king and queen smart cooker in a way? So it was given to me as an example, and I will be ready to make that available. Because if we engage in Africa, sometimes the local content is very essential, and in real time, a World Bank person talking to the audience, and those youth can pull out their cell phone and be able to find the solution for themselves. And it will be something of good memory for each one of you. I have a solution. I don't just talk, I just do it. We're talking energy, we're talking transportation. We're ready to engage directly if you all allow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Who would like to start? Should we start with the World Bank?
Okay, so I take the women and the AI. Let me start with AI first. So I think it's an area I think everyone involved, and particularly the energy team, we are observing this with huge interest on what can be done. There's different things where AI is already coming into play. Some investors are already using it to get a better sense on what is actually affordability of certain households for certain products, what can be a repayment rate, how do certain cohorts behave actually, and that has been incredibly helpful in predicting where can private companies go and how much subsidy do they actually need, and where is the viable business model, and where does the viable business model end. So that's something we've already seen actually over the last couple of years. We've also seen it being applied in helping us understand a little bit more, particularly on the mini-grid side, forecasting demand. So what are the demand curves we are seeing? What can be expected? And that's also quite helpful if you're combining that with least cost planning, geospatial analysis, and then you're plugging in also the data we're seeing on how the loads are behaving. But I think we are at the beginning of this. There's so many applications of AI in the energy space, and also, of course, on the other side, we need to think about providing energy to data centers. So it's a two-way street. On the women, so I think I want to just highlight again what mentioned earlier. So we are doing 150 projects under Mission 300. And every single project of that has what we call agenda tag. Agenda tag means you need to have clearly identified what is your gender gap and how do you seek to address it. And that can take different shapes and forms. We're not prescriptive because each project is different. But it can be, in many cases, as the Abe has mentioned, we're looking at how many female enterprises have actually been supported through our results-based financing. It can also be how many more females are employed by the utility. That's another example. It really depends on what the nature of the project is and where it's best suited to help close the gap. And of course, ultimately, we're thinking about these gender gaps towards what creates livelihoods for women and what increases their independence. The other thing we're doing, we have the Women in Energy Network, which is really bringing together women across Africa to help just build that network and help build the inroads, so that making sure that we're not I mean, this panel is an exception, right? But usually, if we are sitting on panels, usually there's one woman and it's 5 men if we're lucky, right? Often it's just 5 men. So really having that network between women to make sure we can link each other, we think of each other when there's an opportunity, and that's something that's also, I think, it's helping a lot. And yeah, we'll speak about the barriers.
Yeah, before that, I just remind, because that when I work on cooking, you often hear the story, that's very inspiring story. It reminded me that I see a widow that they use improved cooking and have a small bakery shop and raised her children to school, to college. It's very proud. You see, sometimes the small technology change person's life, the family's life. It's bring the agency to a woman. And I think women is particularly needed in terms, first, need to free up from the poverty trap you were in, because you spend like 5-6 hours of collecting wood and cook, right? You have no space, no energy to think beyond that. And then that's once you're able to free up because of time, because of the fuel savings, you can think more to improve yourself. And we have seen the cases, as I mentioned in Rwanda, from users that have no money to pay the school fee for kids to become a selling agent. And then that really starting to do some business. So I think those kind of transformative personal life also very inspiring, and then that can be quickly because we learn from each other. So that's a personal reflection. And on the key barriers in Africa, because I had worked in Asia, Central Asia, East Asia, globally before I focused on Africa, I do notice there are some key challenges in Africa in terms of investment. There's a high perceived risks and the real risks. Think about, I grew up in China, and I just often see that the consumer in China is just so lucky. And you see the solar panel, solar lantern, there is maybe $20, $10, $30 full solar home system. Once landed in Africa and then counted all the cost, it's become $200 total over lifetime. It's just, and they think about the affordability of the users. The math just do not add up. And how much the government have to put in the subsidies in order to make it work. So the perceived risks, right? The regulatory uncertainty, the foreign exchange risks, the macro, the conflicts. Every business have to incorporate that risks, and then the real risks, right? So that's, I felt, that the biggest challenge. That's we're bank come in, try to see, okay, from the policy side, regulatory environment, how to help the tariff, the in labor environment, and then de-risking, how to help people understand the financial institutions, to understand the business models, and then the partial credit guarantee, so help them to de-risk. But someone need to pay for the risks. So that's why I also bring in different concessional finance and then work on the innovative instruments. But I do see the confidence in terms of once you build a track record, and you build track record for the consumers, for the lenders, for the equity investors, and it will decrease the perception of the risks and decrease the costs.
Thank you so much. Karabo, you had an addition you wanted to make. We're running very low on time. We have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask everyone to
Yeah. So, just to add on to that, I mean, there's a lot of barriers. I think there's a lot: governance, infrastructural deficits, institutional incapacity, and so forth. But at the heart of it is literally capital. And I think it speaks to what Doc was saying in terms of the perceived risk, the credit rating agencies. A lot of us are in like junk status. The debt, financing models, a lot of us are debt distressed. So we just, in simple terms, we really don't have the money to be able to facilitate a lot of energy development in the way that we could and we should. And there's not a lot of risk financiers who are willing to absorb any of that risk of investing onto the continent. So at the heart of it all is really money and financing.
Thank you so much. Just to get the last questions in, if you can ask a question in under 30 seconds, then you can do it. Otherwise, we're going to be kicked out, and then we'll have a quick answers.
Hello, my name is Amza. I'm a student at American University. My question was toward Dean, but I don't know if he's still online. It's about industrial policy, because we know the role of the private sector is quite important in producing economies of scale, but we know they're also profit-driven. So the question is this a government project, a public project, or is it a private-public partnership, and what's the role of the private sector in here?
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Sophia Samontaroy. I'm with Health Policy Watch. I just wanted to note that the reducing air pollution exposure is one of the most clear and compelling arguments for the clean cooking transition. I wanted to ask about collaborations with ministries of health and bringing in health financing in the health sector in general.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Eri Bafida from the Water Light Save Initiative. For me, clean cooking issue is more like a sustainable issue for me. So I want to ask the question, how do we intend to get this to the grassroots to make sure that those in those underserved communities are beneficiaries of this project and not just those at the city center? And for the World Bank, how do you intend to actually put an accurate and a sustainable monitoring and evaluation process that will help make sure that this funding that is going to Africa actually reach those people that truly need it and not the government? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think we could start with Raj and go down and answer whichever question you'd like, and then also give your concluding remarks if possible.
Sure, and I'd just like to respond to the gentleman. I think the first thing is, and maybe I'm preempting Joe's response, but I think she just said it's, the compact 2.0? But yeah, the point is there is already, the tracker 2.0, and I think that's what we really need to use to hold the World Bank accountable, but also our governments. That's the first one. And in terms of collaboration with ministries of energy, I think that's a brilliant solution. I think it's not something we do currently. I think the challenge also with civil society and all other actors is some ministries, the Ministry of Finance doesn't necessarily speak to the Ministry of Climate, doesn't necessarily speak to the Ministry of Gender, all of that. So even going back home, or to our countries, there has to be that collaboration from government, internally as well. And I think that's lacking, but it's something we can take forward. And in terms of concluding remarks, all I'll say is definitely there's a lot of interest in this, and this is not the first of these kind of panels. There's a lot of talk that has happened around Mission 300. There is Mission Agribusiness. There's going to be the launch tomorrow on water. So all these things are connected, and there can be no energy without food security, without water security, all of these things. So when we are talking about solutions, let's not just say because this is a gender issue or because this is a clean cooking issue or because it's a health issue, it's separate from somebody's life. When we're talking about connections, we are talking about connections in all those spheres. So the funding has to bring, all of that in one room. And maybe kudos to the bank to try that. But I think, we need to monitor and just hold them accountable on each of these, financing models. Yeah, thanks. And back to you, Kath.
Karabo.
Yeah, I will just like to add on to that in terms of institutional linkages are very much important. So I think sometimes with the compacts, the governments, and engagement with communities and civil societies, there sometimes is a bit of a gap. I think we've had conversations on Mission 300 where civil society in country, like our governments have never spoken to us about the compacts, and maybe that's something we need to look at. What does institutional linkages at a national level look like? Because we can obviously have conversations with the bank, but then on the ground, there's no level of accountability. It's hard to hold them accountable because they don't even speak to, communities and the civil society space. So there's also that. Institutional linkages need to basically improve. And I guess that speaks on to the monitoring and evaluation to say, it then refines also some of the data around what does citizen reporting look like? Because the reality is beneficiaries obviously sitting with a lot of they can validate a lot of the reporting that's really happening. But is the data collected by the very governments that don't really speak to the civil society organizations and so forth? So yeah, I guess an accountability mechanism of some sort needs to happen so that there are no separations between what the bank is saying, what the AFDB is saying, what the governments are saying, and what the citizens are saying.
Yeah, maybe I can just comment on that monitoring side. So I think the reason why we really like results-based financing so much is because the payments are actually linked to results, verified results. So in practice, how it works is the payment to the private sector is done in installments. The first one, if they're reporting that a connection was made, then we'll go and verify, was that connection made? Was the connection really made in the location they have said they made it? Right? Because many of the subsidies are actually contingent on the location. The more rural, the higher the subsidy. The more poor the region, the higher the subsidy would be. And then a second payment will come only once we verified that the household continues to use the product. So it's not only, a product is being, sold and then the private sector leaves and there's no after-sale service. No, a year later or a couple of months later, depending on the project and the sector context, we call again, ask, are you still using the product? Are you happy with the product? And only if we get a yes, that second tranche of payment is being made. And all of that is supported through increasingly digital tools, so we can actually visualize on a map where are those connections. And that is incredibly helpful, not only for the monitoring, but also for the planning. So I think that's just something we're seeing increasingly rolled out in most of our projects, these digital tools, but the monitoring of results-based financing is really at the core, and that's why we like it, that's why the private sector likes it, that's why many of the civil society organizations like it too, as I understand it. And also, quite frankly, why governments like it, because also that's the way they can keep the private sector accountable too.
So I can take on the question about health impacts and health financing, because it's a very good question, because indeed the drive, when they say clean, is really from the health angle. From the bank side, we did try to, I think health come in different angles. One is that awareness raising, because the behavior, the doctor say something that the people will listen more. Okay, that's one. Second is because you have health outcome. I mean, again, that we see that by promoting clean cooking, there are multiple benefits. Climate benefits, with already a key business model in terms of carbon revenue, carbon credits. Second is the health outcome. There are indicators. So we have worked with academic and health colleagues. We call that ADALI, averted disease-adjusted life year. So you can actually calculate for people switching from traditional cooking to clean cooking by quantify the exposure to household air pollution. You can estimate the disease-adjusted life year. The saving, you can actually estimate the life saved, and then you can monetize that. I think the key is still that it's more on the theory. We actually did a pilot in Kenya to quantify that. But again, I think the house donor or financiers still yet to understand better and then see it's a valuable commodities to put in financing there. So that's something need to continue to work on that. We also did even the gender impacts. You can measure, right? The time saved. You can monitor, you can measure, you can quantify. That can also be we had done pilots that, and then the government could pay for that, or the donors could pay for that. Again, that those co-benefits can be measured and quantified and the value monetized. We're hoping that it's just someone need to come forward to pay for, recognize that the value and then pay for it. In some cases, government in general, right? When they see, okay, why we put IDA funding or basically the government funding in clean cooking support, it's based on, okay, the public benefits that including health, climate, and agenda. So in a way, it's implicitly included. But ideally, if we can further crowd in other development financing specifically interested in health and gender, I think it also will be very useful to get more financing for this sector, which really need the public financing and then crowding the private financing.
Thank you so much. We're definitely out of time, but thank you all for being here. Thank you to Dr. Yabe and Johanna from the World Bank, to Karabo, Raj and Dean, and to all of you for being here for this really important discussion. And in DC, to discuss what for millions isn't theoretical or about numbers, but a question of health, livelihood, and a dignified existence. And I think it's a privilege to have this conversation that none of us take lightly. And the first of many conversations on clean cooking, I'm sure, that we look forward to having with the bank. So thanks again, and I wish you all a successful time at the spring meetings.
Recording stopped.